Welcome to Wait, What? Sports Biz Chat with DP and McGhee, the podcast that takes an often irreverent, sometimes cynical, and on occasion even a serious look at the business of sports. I'm your co-host, David Paro.
And I'm Tim McGhee.
Well, first of all, I have to say, I think I jinxed the Clarendon Hills Little League, who got torched by Nevada in their first game in the Little League World Series. But they did manage to grab a win before getting eliminated by Hawaii in Williamsport. Still incredible accomplishment for them. So it was great, and I was been really excited to be watching ESPN's broadcast from Williamsport at the Little League World Series, coming off of the guest that we had on last week, Liz DeLulo-Brown from Little League International. So, but Tim, I know you are on vacation.
Yes, I am. But there is no vacation from this podcast.
There is no vacation. You can't do it. There's just too many things going on. So, but while you're on vacation, what's on your mind?
So the father of the modern Olympic Games is Pierre de Coubertin, the French historian and educator who relaunched the Olympics in 1894 with the first modern games held in 1896 in Athens. The father of the postmodern games is Peter Ueberroth.
Mm-hmm.
Who ran the 1984 Olympics. As far as I know, the first Olympic Games to make a profit. He was famous for putting out sponsorships to bid. Coke and Pepsi put their bid in an envelope famously, sent them in. Coca-Cola won. Fujifilm beat Kodak, so on and so forth down the line. Now we fast forward 131 years later from when Pierre de Coubertin wanted to restart the Olympics, and we have big news coming out of LA, which is for the first time in Olympic history, the local organizing committee will be allowed to sell naming rights to the venues in the market. And we have some very iconic venues in LA already, SoFi Stadium, Crypto.com Arena, and so forth. And so now they're going out and they're trying to sell these sponsorships for, in some cases, 9 figures. So I think it might be the last best chance for the LA 2028 USAP consortium to make their revenue number. But it's going to be fascinating to see.
Now, a couple things on that. First of all, your Duolingo, your French studies in Duolingo are really coming into play with the pronunciation of Pierre de Coubertin. That was very impressive. But yeah, and I think Casey Wasserman may be the next person on that list, right? And coming out of LA, because Ueberroth obviously famous for the LA Olympics. But listen, the number they have to hit is so massive. And it sounds like it was the LA 28 group going to the IOC and basically selling this idea and it getting the approval. But their numbers, I mean, they have to hit nearly $7 billion in revenue to make this thing work. And a big chunk of that is expected to come, about $2.5 billion of that from sponsorship. So this puts them on a path to potentially be able to get there. I thought it was really exciting because there's one that's already been announced, and it happened to come from the squash venue, and I was able to connect because of that with past guest Kevin Klipstein, the head of that particular NGB, about it, and of course he expressed a lot of excitement, and that's going to Comcast. So, and they have that unbelievable venue that they're creating on the Universal Studios lot. So pretty exciting about that. It is going to be interesting because SoFi and Crypto.com will have the chance to buy it. If they don't, my understanding is, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that they will go blank. They won't have a name, as is normally the case on venues. And remember, the policy of the Olympics has always been clean venue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, only heretofore, the only sponsored logos were on either equipment or apparel. So yeah, that was my understanding as well. And they also, interestingly enough, but not surprisingly, venues like the Rose Bowl and the Dodger Stadium, will not be up for sale.
Right. Just the names have been around for so long, so iconic. I think that probably would have been problematic. So a lot of these will be the temporary ones and maybe the lesser known facilities in there. But as you said in your intro on the topic, I mean, LA is just there's no shortage of iconic venues in the LA area.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So for example, Pauley Pavilion, if they are able to sell that, if I'm UCLA, I'm like, okay, I want a cut of that. if you're gonna
Interesting.
if you're gonna affix a name to the venue on our campus, then I would like a piece of that. Thank you very much. It's the price tag is going to be exorbitant. So you're limiting the number of brands that could potentially be interested, and then they have to have global resonance, because to do it just for the U.S. audience is probably not going to be worth it. So if you've got the international market, then you've got to be a brand that wants to be relevant globally, I would think.
I think so. One of the interesting things about this decision, and it's not really surprising in a way, it was surprising in that the news broke and it was like, that's a big development in the Olympic movement. But it's not completely surprising when you think about where things are going in terms of, sponsored elements of the sporting world. Interestingly, another past guest, Terrence Burns, who is one of the most, renowned Olympic experts there is, he has basically said, take it easy, people. They're never going to go to actually having the sponsorship take over the field. Like, say, SoFi Stadium, say SoFi steps up, it becomes named stadium during the Olympic broadcast, and then there's a field of play, and say the track and field activity has different sponsors on that. He's saying that's not going to happen. I'm not so sure. Like, after a certain point, when the revenue needs and the revenue demands are even that much more serious, do they end up going that path as well? I think he's right in the near term, say the next 20 years, but I could see it happening certainly down the road, just to foot the bill of these really, really expensive competitions.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because what FIFA does. So FIFA's got a year. Does FIFA go to MetLife and say, listen, we'll sell you, the ability to have your name associated with this event, including the finals, AT&T in Dallas, and so forth down the line. It'll be interesting to see that. Obviously, not a lot of time for them to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But 11 months out, 10 months out from the tournament. But a lot that was by far the biggest name in news and sponsorship this week, but certainly not the only piece.
You want to jump right into Spotlight on Sponsorship?
Sure. Why not?
How do we feel about these sponsorship deals?
Let's do it.
So the next one, Xfinity has already announced that they were coming off the entitlement of the secondary series in NASCAR racing, the Xfinity series. So previously the Busch series and so forth. And O'Reilly Auto Parts has stepped in to become the naming rights starting next year. Obviously a very good fit from a brand relevance perspective, an authentic fit. But and I have to tell you, the CW has done a fantastic job with that series this year. Great production, over 1 million fans. Every time I look at the ratings, there's over 1 million viewers for the race. So they're doing really well. So kudos to O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Yeah, I think NASCAR has always had that feather in their cap to be able to say that the two most popular racing series, I don't think that's exactly accurate right now, but were Cup and then Xfinity. But yeah, it consistently does pretty decent numbers. I think this is a great get. It's back to an endemic, say, someone that's very much tied to the auto business. So that's a natural. And one of the things I saw that Steve O'Donnell, the now president since Steve Phelps has now been elevated to commissioner of NASCAR, has said is that getting that on the ground activation, literally retail activation in all of the key markets because of the brand reach of O'Reilly's is going to be significant. And so I'm very excited to see where the activation comes out on that and how they're doing it. But yes, I think it's a great get for NASCAR and taking over for Xfinity in that next down series from the Cup Series. And then there's another one, and I'll bring this up because I know you have a unique connection to it. And that's USAA has renewed its long-standing NFL sponsorship with just and I don't know the exact term, but a very long-term extension. They've been around for a long time.
15 years.
Yeah. So that's one of those partnerships that feels like it makes sense. It does make sense, and it has the tenure of showing that it has made sense. And they were the first ones to come on as the military appreciation sponsor. So I think it's a great fit. I know you have a great history with that particular sponsorship, with how it came about. So I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about that.
Yeah. So back in the day when I was on the agency side with IMG, USAA was one of our clients. And Sean Morrissey, who I've mentioned multiple times on this, a good friend of mine, and we've worked together many times, many different places for many years. He and I led the negotiations on behalf of USAA with another past guest, Renee Anderson. And one of the things that we had landed upon was, and I believe it was the first ever, in addition to being at that time, the exclusive insurance sponsor of the NFL, Nationwide has since come in and they split the category, but at the time it was the first military appreciation partner.
Mm-hmm.
The NFL, more than any other professional leagues, leans into the military, and USAA's entire mission is to serve the military and their families. So it just made perfect sense. Great client, really one of those case studies in, a sponsorship working to elevate the brand. USAA had just recently broadened its eligibility, and so it made a lot of sense. And 15 years later, it's one of those things that I'm personally very proud of, that when you put a client or brand into a sponsorship and then you look 15 years later and they're still involved, and obviously you did something right. Not to toot my own horn, but when I was at MLS All-Star last month and to see AT&T, which was a deal that I oversaw when I was running sponsorships for AT&T, still 16, 17 years later, still with the league, you take some pride that you did something right, that if they're still involved.
Yeah, you did the sponsorship for the right reasons. You found the right brand fit, and you created the narrative around that sponsorship that was going to last the test of time. And USAA certainly does that, a brand that's very, very clear in its mission, even though, as you said, they've expanded what their customer base can be, I think smartly, but their mission and who they serve and why they do it makes sense. And the NFL audience, both one of the great, huge breadth of audience and depth of passion of that fan base. So it's a nice property, not the the least expensive of sponsorships, of course, but one that has the potential to do it. And they've activated nicely against it. Obviously, they've had this campaign with Gronk for a few years that helps them tell their story about who they indeed are serving. So yeah, congrats to everybody on that team, and congrats to you. You're right to toot your horn, Tim. You did do something right and well. So well done. I want to, for a second, mention a league that we probably haven't given as much attention to, but they seem to quietly be making things happen since we had John 𝘗𝘐𝑢𝑥𝑖 on to talk about the international activity of the NHL. We haven't talked about the NHL that much, but they've had ongoing news and some positive ones about, media deals and so forth. And they also, they did an international deal with DAZN to increase reach. And they also just got their CBA basically agreed to in principles with the NHLPA. And the only reason I really want to bring this up is because it we've talked about various other negotiations coming on with MLB, with the WNBA, and the contentiousness that they are either facing or we expect that they will be facing. And the NHL just kind of banged this out. So Bettman and Marty Walsh, a former government person from Boston, who's now the head of the NHLPA, just ironed it out. No fanfare, just kind of got it done. So kudos to the NHL for getting things done quietly, which is not the normal way things happen in the sports world.
Yeah, sometimes no drama is a good thing. You look at baseball. Baseball has the hot stove league between the end of the World Series and spring training. The NFL obviously has done a tremendous job of turning itself into a 12-month-a-year sport. Basketball has the summer league. NHL sort of goes quiet when the season's over. And so I think, to a certain extent, I think it works in their favor. Yes, you would always want to be top of mind with fans and media and sponsors and so forth. But at the end of the day, to your point, they got stuff done, and they did it outside the glare of the spotlight. And so maybe it's a good thing sometimes to not always be, above the fold, so to speak, literally and figuratively. I want to go back and talk a little bit about football. Couple stories about football that I'd love to touch on. One is the Players Association. We talked about sort of the mishigas going on in the Players Association. 𝘗𝘭𝘢𝘵 McPhee, who I believe was the Associate General Counsel, has been placed on paid leave for, among other things, bullying subordinates within the organization. It just sounds like there's a cultural problem there more than anything else, which if you're the players in the NFL, the members, the rank and file, you got to be a little bit concerned about, because every moment they're dealing with a legal issue, trouble with leadership, is a minute that they're not working on behalf of the players, which is their entire mission. So, as they say, watch this space. And
not to give anything away, because we do have a guest for this episode that we've already recorded, and we'll talk about that again at the end, that is a former NFLPA person, and he was willing to share some thoughts on what's going on there, which I was very excited and pleased that he was willing to do.
A couple other things. We'll stick on pro, and then I'll go to college, if you don't mind. Brian Flores, who's the former Miami Dolphins coach, who was fired by Steve Ross and claimed he was discriminated against. He is now an assistant. The courts have decided that his case can go to trial for discrimination. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens whenever you have a case like this. Obviously, there's discovery. A lot of times parties don't want certain things revealed that would come out in discovery. So it'll be interesting to see if the league settles with Brian Flores before it goes to trial.
Yeah, the whole thing was such a weird story when it broke, and it kind of gone quiet for a while, but it will be interesting to follow it.
Yeah. And then a couple of things on colleges. One is, the other thing I'll hold for later at the close. But Michigan, the NCAA came down and fined Michigan $20 million for the signal stealing debacle from several years ago when 𝘗𝘭𝘢𝘵 was still coaching the team. He's been sanctioned. He can't coach in football for I don't know how many years, which is really nothing. The current coach has been suspended. But one of the things that I do think the NCAA got right is that there was no punishment that was going to hurt the current players. That's always been my issue with NCAA punishment. It goes back in time so far that the kids who were affected are ones who had nothing to do with the program at the time the transgression occurred. So I do like the fact that there were no wins vacated, but I also like the fact that there's no postseason penalty. These kids aren't being punished for the sins committed by those before them.
Yeah, I do think that was interesting. It was a monetary situation, but I recall when we spoke of this when the news broke on the Connor Stalions scouting issues, and
I don't know what Connor Stalions is doing now, but I do know what that name lends itself to.
Yes, of course. And we speculated about Harbaugh. This was before Harbaugh was off to the Chargers, but it was classic. He's penalized, I suppose, but he's out and he's now doing what he did. And we kind of knew it was like, he got caught, he's going to be gone again. I don't think we were surprised that it was them. They certainly denied it. He denied it. But it was, it was nice to see some action taken. Like severe action taken.
And I also think Michigan has to give up a percentage of its revenues too, in addition to the $20 million fine. So they are hitting him where it hurts. And so there are sort of domino effect from that. If you have less money coming in, you can pay less in NIL. It may hurt your recruiting. And so but
it does show you how much they have and how many people will step up to support Big Blue. I mean, it's just the money's just so crazy. That's my point. That's
right.
all.
Is Larry Ellison going to step in again? Who knows? Anyway, what do you say? Should we take a break? Or you got something else? Okay.
It's time for our guest.
So we have spoken of tennis often on this show, but to date, we have not had a leader on the podcast to discuss the business side of the sport. But with the U.S. Open set to begin in New York on August 24th, we wanted to rectify that. So we are thrilled to have Ahmad Nassar, a longtime leader on the labor side of the sports business, join us. Ahmad serves both as the executive director of the Professional Tennis Players Association, the PTPA, and as CEO of Winners Alliance, the commercial arm of the PA, a unit he founded. Ahmad spent more than 10 years at the NFL Players Association, the last 5 as president. He then became the founding CEO of One Team Partners, which brought together the licensing and athlete marketing businesses of NFL and MLB Players Associations. He's launched multiple companies, always on the side of supporting athletes and protecting their intellectual property. All this after leaving a promising career as a litigator. So Ahmad, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. I hope I can live up to it. I mean, it sounded pretty good, so thank you.
We are certain you will. We'll try to make that part easy for you. So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and just jump on in. You currently serve, as I said, as the executive director of the PTPA and CEO of Winners Alliance. Give us an overview of each of those organizations and how they actually operate to some degree together, but maybe some degree separately.
Yeah. So the model is the PTPA is a nonprofit advocacy group advocating on behalf of professional tennis players across the spectrum, across the globe, men and women, top players, middle ranked players, lower ranked players, generally defined as the top 250 men, 250 women on the singles side, top 100 men, top 100 women on the doubles side. And there's some overlap there. So that total player universe is something like 600 or so players. But then obviously we care about that pathway. How do you become one of those players, which then involves things like the ITF, the International Tennis Federation, and other issues that players, and even now with the NCAA and some of the changes going on there, and that becoming a more viable pathway to the professional ranks is something of interest to us at the PTPA. And so we focus our time at the PTPA on advocating for the players, providing services for the players, benefits for the players, very much like what other players associations that have been around for decades provide for their membership, both here in the United States, but also across the globe.
And Ahmad, David mentioned in his introduction, you have a long career on the labor side of sports, but how is your work with the PTPA different from past experiences you've had advocating for athletes and supporting and representing athletes?
Yep. And I'll get to that in a second. I forgot the Winners Alliance part to David's question.
I'm sorry.
That's
All right.
my
This is
fault.
what makes this show so
That's
live
my
and
fault.
vibrant.
So on the Winners Alliance side, that's a for-profit licensing and marketing company that really was set up to effectively endow the PTPA over the long run, but also to be able to work across multiple sports. As in a lot of arenas, both within sports and outside, there's real strength in numbers. And strength in diversity, defined in the sports context as multiple sports, multiple athletes, multiple regions of the globe. And so we've been very fortunate over the last really 3 years to build out the Winners Alliance arm to include working on behalf of not only men's and women's tennis players, but cricketers across the globe, college sports athletes, EuroLeague basketball players, track athletes, all with the same kind of general premise, right? How do we help these athletes and their players associations better commercialize, better monetize, and really their agents, right? I mean, a lot of these athletes are, especially in the individual sports, they're bearing so much of the brunt of being a professional in that sport. And it has some very kind of existential questions of what does it even mean, right? That's one of the early kind of difficult questions I got. And this gets to your question, Tim, which is like, Ahmad, what do you define a professional tennis player as? Clearly, somebody in the top 10 or top 100 is a professional, but are they still professional if they're the top 1,000, top 5,000? And you don't have that question in the NFL and MLB, because if you're in the NFL, okay, there's some practice squad players, there's people who get signed off the street during the season, depending on injuries and all that. But it's very clear. You sign a contract, you're in the NFL, right? Same thing with the MLB and the NBA and the NHL. But you don't really have that kind of distinction and neat, clean line, certainly in tennis, but also in other sports like track, particularly these Olympic sports. And what does that mean going forward, right? And then that kind of really broad question of, Well, how many players, how many athletes in any particular sport should be able to call themselves a professional such that they can make a living wage playing, and I hate that word playing, but working in the sport
Hmm.
that they are world class in, right? And in tennis, that number is embarrassingly low, right? That number is short of 100 players on the men's side and short of 100 players, well short of 100 players on the women's side. For a sport that is a top four sport across the globe in terms of fandom and viewership and all these other metrics, that's unconscionable. It is unconscionable that only double digit men and women each can reliably earn more than they have to spend playing tennis professionally. American football, and I have to say this when we talk about global sports because you have to distinguish from soccer, right? American football supports not only the 22 to 2,500 or so players who play in any given year in the NFL, but you've got UFL players. Now you've got college football players, some of whom are making more money in college than they will in the NFL, at least on their rookie deals. And so you have the inverse. That's a sport that is barely top 10 in terms of viewership and fandom globally, and yet number one by a mile in terms of how they commercialize. And that's really the model: is how do you grow the pie, but really starting with the central question of like, who's a professional? Who gets to call themselves a professional athlete? And we didn't really have to deal with that, Tim, at the NHL, NFLPA or MLBPA, or even some of those up and coming growing players associations like women's soccer and the MLSPA. They have pretty well defined who's a member, who's covered, who's not. And certainly when it comes to these big global sports, they don't have thousands and thousands of soccer players globally can earn a living playing professionally, right? And here you've got double digits. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, unbelievable background. Thank you for that. Very, very enlightening. And I think that leads to the next question I wanted to ask. The PTPA was founded only in 2020 by Novak Djokovic and Vasek Pospisil. I think I got that pronounced right.
You did.
What were the WTA and ATP missing? And maybe you just touched on that, but could you go even deeper? What were they missing in terms of looking after these athletes that necessitated this?
Yeah. And it's important to note that both of those guys, Novak and Vasek, but also Bethany Maddox-Sands and John Isner, who were original executive committee members of the PTPA, those four players served on their respective athlete advisory councils at the tours. So they were already player leaders as anointed by other players in their respective tours. And they tried to effectuate change and advocate for players within the current system. And all four of them, I think, independently realized this isn't working. This system, it's a structural issue. This system doesn't work on behalf of the players. And I think what they realized was missing was what you see in a lot of these other sports is an independent group, whatever you want to call it, that only focuses on the player side, right? And that interacts with everybody else in the ecosystem, but only from the perspective of the players as a group, right? And that's the key. Not specific clients, not, specific genders, not specific regions of the globe, right? Because you have pockets of that. You have agencies that represent lots of players, but not all of them. You have national governing bodies that care deeply about players from their home country, but not any others, right? And so you kind of have this patchwork, and they noticed the patchwork, it just has a lot of gaps, and we need to fill those gaps because people try to fixate on compensation, and that's certainly something that we're focused on changing and improving over time so that more players can call themselves professional tennis players. But it's really much broader than that, right? We have a chief medical director who's on board with the PTPA now and doing things like, hey, what is the effect of changing tennis balls throughout the season? What is the effect of late night matches? Turns out, no shock, the injury rates go much higher when you play a late night match. Your recovery time gets pinched and your next match injury rate goes up. And so what are these ramifications? The endless season, like all these things, everybody's looking at it from their perspective, but nobody was looking at it from the player perspective writ large. And that's really what they wanted to change in starting the PTPA.
You founded and you were co-founded and you were chairman of the board of One Team Collective, which worked with the MLB and the NFLPA. Your work with Winners Alliance, you mentioned earlier, it's a for-profit outgrowth of the players of the PTPA in order to fund some of the initiatives that you want to do for the nonprofit piece. How can you tell us how Winners Alliance is similar to the One Team Collective and how it differs from One Team Collective?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're all the products of where we've been in our lives, right? And experiences we've had. So certainly some very useful lessons and parallels and learnings from my time at both the NFLPA and One Team Partners. I'm proud to say we've applied many of those lessons, right, to in building Winners Alliance. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got in thinking about international sports and just sports more globally is it's not like McDonald's, right? You can start a McDonald's in the US and then export it to every country on the planet, and it still looks and feels, and a Big Mac and it is a Big Mac, right? But that's not the case in most businesses, right? You can't just take a model that works in one place and just spread it out across the globe, right? That is probably the biggest difference, I would say, is understanding the nuances of sports that are individual sports, sports that are global, sports that have men and women, sports that are historical British Commonwealth sports like cricket, right? These are all nuances that we have to approach differently. And we've seen examples where the American model has kind of disastrous effects internationally, right? Remember the Super League when it came to soccer? And they're like, oh, it would be great. Let's create a Super League. And then like within 24 hours, the thing completely fell apart, right? And spawned multiple lawsuits that I think some of which are still ongoing. So like this is a thing where we have a really unique perspective in terms of sports and the business of sports in North America, right? And I think it's actually great. It's certainly great for the athletes, but you can't just export that wholesale, right? Just like you can't export team sport constructs to individual sports, right? And so, but what can you pull? I mean, there are certain fundamental truths that are just should be unavoidable, right? And that players deserve independent representation should be a fundamental truth. Sports business, like all business, needs to follow the law of the EU, the UK, North America, anywhere you operate. That shouldn't be a controversial or novel sentiment. And yet here we are, right? And so I think the biggest difference is just if you're acting globally, if you're acting across these different sports, you have to apply, adapt the model, and do things differently and be flexible. And I think that's what we've had to do. But there's certainly a lot of parallels, and that's not a coincidence. That's by design.
I think you'll be happy to know, and for what it's worth, that this show, as we've bragged about recently, has been listened to in 66 countries around the world, or territories, I should say. Territories, countries and territories. So we try to take the global perspective a little bit, but we very much appreciate that. You've talked about cricket, you've talked about track and field and basketball as other extensions that Winners Alliance is working with. Can you talk about any other expansion plans? Is the model set to be able to take on more? What do you have your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, there's never a hard and fast answer to that. We're opportunistic. If you told me 3 years ago that we'd be talking about those athletes, I would have said, get out of here. That sounds crazy, right? And yet here we are. And so I think 3 years from now, a year from now, I can't predict the future, but we're going to stick to those fundamental truths, and we're going to stick to those North Stars, right? In terms of, hey, what are we about? What are we trying to do for athletes globally? What are we trying to do for men and women who are trying to make their way playing sports? And so we have regular conversations with lots of different athletes across the globe, but we have to be cognizant of we've got a great team, but it's a small team and there's limited resources. And so how do we want to think about priorities, and how do we, but then there's lots of people out there that we could partner with and people we can talk to, and how do you expand? So there's not a playbook, and there's not like a roadmap in terms of, okay, 2026 guys, we're going to add X, and 2027, we're going to add Y, and 2028. No, we're very much, it's entirely possible that a year from now or 3 years from now, we're still talking about exactly those same sports. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, we're going to go where we need to spend our time, and where we're going to get the most impact for the time we spend.
I'm curious, given, and I'll just focus primarily on Novak. I mean, his reputation is massive, obviously. I guess arguably, maybe inarguably now, the greatest player ever to play. he's got relationships. He loves sports. He loves all kinds of things, right? He's a very well-versed, intelligent guy. Does he get involved in those things? Is he bringing ideas to the table all the time? And I guess some of the other top players that are involved in the association and Winners Alliance.
Yeah. I will, without getting into any specific conversation, say our player leadership is like any player leadership in any sport I've ever dealt with, not shy. And it is pretty cool to see the interplay because the athletes think exactly the way we've been talking, right? They're just in this fraternity sorority of professional athletes. They get a real kick out of hanging out with the cricket people. They get a real kick out of hanging out with basketball. We're doing an event, and I know you want to talk about this, but before the U.S. Open next week at the NBPA, the NBA Players Association's headquarters, on Wednesday and Thursday night, right? Where we're going to bring tennis players and we're going to have them interact with people across the sports industry and health and wellness and medical, but also NBA players, right? And so that overlap, and we similarly, they had an event in Spain last month that they do regularly that we had our medical director at talking about tennis and right. And so there's just a lot of synergies where the athletes really, if you think about it, their professional lives, one might be swinging a racket, one might be swinging a bat, and one might be running on a track. But the reality is so many of the challenges they face and longevity and recovery and the mental strain that they all bear, the dealing with family and friends when you're traveling across time zones and all this stuff, so much of that is a shared experience. And so the more we can get folks like that, even if there's not business behind it, it's just more getting people together, the better we're gonna all be.
Yeah, I've always loved that interplay between athletes of different sports. Last year we had Rashid Khan, the great Afghanistan cricketer, at a F1 race, and he so lit up seeing what the drivers did, what the crew did. He did a pit stop practice. He was asking questions of the team principal. It was just and the people on the team, a lot of Brits, as you might suspect, who were big cricket fans, were just in awe of this great bowler from Afghanistan. Anyway.
Yep.
So you mentioned the upcoming U.S. Open, the final major of the year. Anything, whether you're a tennis fan, whether you're a follower of the business of sports, anything that we can look forward to coming out in terms of sponsorships, licensing news, anything that you can share with us about the PTPA that might be coming around the bend there?
Yeah. So I did mention this health and wellness kind of off the court summit happening at the NBA Players Association offices Wednesday, Thursday night next week. And look, I think right before Wimbledon, we made a bit of news around the fact that we've got this big lawsuit pending against the tours and really everybody in the tennis ecosystem on the tournament and event side. But we were having and continue to have discussions with the 4 Grand Slams around figuring out ways to think differently, frankly, about the sport of tennis at the professional level so that we can resolve many of the issues that we've raised in those lawsuits and many of the issues that frankly led to the creation of the PTPA in the first place 5-6 years ago. And so we're going to continue to have discussions and meetings around the US Open, players and agents and other stakeholders. We will be announcing or launching with our partners at Wildlife Studios. So they make this amazing game called Tennis Clash that is played by, I think, over 150 million people globally. Again, a testament to the power of tennis, right? People like tennis. And there's a mobile game called Tennis Clash. It's been around for a long time. And they're dropping a character next week fashioned on 𝘈𝘈𝘆𝑒𝑛𝑎 Sabalenka. And they had done a similar drop, I think, before Wimbledon with Naomi Osaka. And so these are the kinds of things where you're tapping into an existing pool of 150 million plus players of a mobile game, all of whom, if they like tennis, know who 𝘈𝘈𝑚𝑎 Sabalenka is, all of whom obviously knew who Naomi Osaka was, and demonstrating the ability to bring more, and we're going to keep doing that throughout the year, bring more and more players that the fans already watch in real life, because the central premise of the U.S. Open is the action on the court, of course. But then being able to enhance, the NBA guys like to talk about how they're a global game, people watch them globally, but less than 1% of their fans are going to set foot in the stadium this year, right? And be able to watch a game. So what are we doing for the rest of the 99% to bring the game to them, not only during the 2 hours that a game or a match might be going on, or 3 hours or 5 hours sometimes, but beyond that, right? And after their favorite player exits the tournament, what are we delivering to them? Because what happens right now is the U.S. Open's the U.S. Open, the French Open's the French Open, and these other tournaments, Cincinnati Open's going on right now, right? They're all kind of these little islands, and you just skip across from island to island. But what's the thread that's tying them through? It's actually the players, right? It's the same group of men and women that are going at every single one of these stops and playing. And so how do we better deliver more? We also have the other big launch this US Open is trading cards. So we, and some of these boxes behind me are trading cards from prior releases. So Fanatics and Topps will be releasing a new set of trading cards featuring lots of players, dozens of players across the men and the women around the US Open this year. And so we're excited for that. But more than anything, it's just like the action on the court, right? And as the last major of the year, and as the three of us are home major and you even closer to home, it's a cool thing to see the entire really attention of the sporting world in North America turn to tennis.
Yeah, Tim salivates anytime he hears trading cards. By the way,
this is how much of a trading card geek I am. I looked over your shoulder and I saw the box of Topps Chrome, and I don't know if salivate's the right word, but I certainly got a little bit of card envy there. Yes.
By the way, right before I jumped on to this recording session, I watched this activation from the Cincinnati Open that they just did with the players, people coming in and basically, like, if they had a chance to talk to players, and there was people of all age groups, young girls talking about Sabalenka, and people talking about Jannik and Carlos and Iga, and it was like this really neat thing. It wasn't even it wasn't even sponsored. It probably should have been. And it was so emotional, but it goes back, particularly in a sport like this, where it is so much about that individual that is going to be taking the court and putting everything on the line in front of people.
I mean, listen, going back to that question you asked about the difference in tennis, there's nowhere to hide. Right? Like you are on that court and it's you. And now I know they allow coaching and they mic up the coaches. That's great. And I think it's actually great content. It's great for the sport. It's great for the players. But man, there is nowhere to hide. And if you play a team sport, it's not that you're hiding, but you're not necessarily on the field all the time. You're not the only point of focus. You might have a helmet or something that covers. There's nowhere to hide, man.
Yeah, and it makes it that much harder, right? Because we react to how they handle things emotionally, and we can be like, we loved when Sabalenka won the U.S. Open last year, and she seemed to win that crowd over. And then at the French, when Coco beat her, it was, she got kind of blasted for that, and I was a little tough on her, I'll be honest. But they're human beings out there, freaking giving it their all, man.
Oh, listen, Naomi just got it a bit for Canadian Open, right? And this notion that immediately after a professional setback, highly public professional setback, you've got to like suddenly compose yourself. You haven't even showered, right? And compose yourself and say something to the world that as a 25 or 30-year-old at most, or 35, I would struggle with that right now. And this is what I do for a living, right? Like that is
the thing that makes them so great at what they do, that competitive fire inside them, that unwillingness to take failure. All of these things are exactly why they shouldn't be put in that position of having to answer questions at that time.
Plus, they have to hold a severely inadequate second-place trophy compared to what the winners hold.
Yeah. No, it's especially when there's big upsets. I think it's just a really tough, almost no-win situation for the second-place winner. They're not the loser, right? Like, this was a tournament with almost 100 players in it, and you're the second-place winner, and you had a great run, and she's still coming back to the form that she is used to and expects of herself, and certainly got closer than she has been in months and months. And so that's a tough, thing to expect of anybody. And
Yeah, we certainly put, and I think tennis players, probably even more than golfers, we judge them toughly in those moments, probably wrongly, but it's part of the game that they have to put up with. And in a way, it's great because you do see some amazing sportsmanship come out of that as well sometimes. Yeah. All right, before we go on to the closing questions, We feel we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you for any comments, any perspective regarding your former employer, the National Football League Players Association, particularly some of the controversy surrounding the former executive director, Lloyd Howell Jr. Would love any thoughts or perspective on that from whatever level you'd like to share.
Yeah. Look, I anytime you spend over a decade in your career somewhere, that place is going to be special to you. I think the young men who play American football at the at the level of the NFL. It's a sport I grew up loving and playing. I had the misfortune or it made me who I was to be a Detroit Lions fan in the 90s and 2000s. And I've been enjoying their it's not even resurgence, but actually being good on a regular basis the last few years. And look, when I got involved, we were having open discussions about concussions shutting down the sport, right? And youth participation rates dropping. And we're sitting here. My son is a 16-year-old high schooler, and he's playing varsity football, right? And he's strapping on a helmet, and they've got all these rules in place that we helped create 10 years ago. And so I just feel a special allegiance to all athletes, but especially those American football players, because that's where I came from. It's where I cut my teeth. It's where I learned, frankly, the business of being an advocate. I went to law school. I was a private practice lawyer. You advocate for a living in those instances, but like to actually be an advocate, I didn't learn that till I got to the NFLPA. And it's a brotherhood and sisterhood of players associations, not only in the US and not only in football, obviously, but across sports and across the globe. And I think, those issues are, look, anytime human beings are involved in anything, there's going to be human failings involved because there's human beings involved. And so clearly, a lot of what's gone on over the last few weeks or months are tough to see and disappointing to see. And obviously, different people involved now, and players are, I think the players, as long as they're engaged and care, you can't go wrong, right? And as long as they lead and know that these are their organizations, you can't go wrong over the long term. Doesn't mean it's going to be a straight line of progress. There's going to be setbacks all the time. And the fact is, we all care because we are all affected. This global player empowerment movement, if anybody's hurting, if anybody's dealing with issues, we all are, right? Because the people on the other side are going to be the quickest ones to say, see, look at what's going on over there. These players associations, they're all a joke. They all don't matter. They all don't really work. And why should you in tennis be part of that, right? Like, this is exactly the conversation that people in management and organizing sports events and teams and leagues and tournaments, that is exactly the logic or illogic that they're going to push is, see, like, you don't need to do that, player X, Y, or Z. You should just work with us and be happy that we give you whatever scraps we give you. And so in that regard, it's both personal because I spent over a decade there and still have friends who work there, but also because I'm still in this movement, right? And what we're trying to do, and we're way earlier in that life cycle of, those guys are 75 years old at the NFLPA as an organization. Baseball is probably right around that same age as well. The NBA is close to that. And so being able to lean on them and stand on their shoulders is important because it's a great example and a great learning for every athlete globally. And so again, when anybody stumbles, it affects all of us, and I'm really hopeful that they will see their way through it.
Can't thank you enough for coming on the show. But before we let you go, we have two questions that we like to ask every guest. So the first one is this.
Where'd your career get started? Where'd you start it?
Yeah, I'm always tempted to say blind, dumb luck, and there's always a component of that, but it was sort of a fortuitous. I was working at a law firm 4 blocks from the NFLPA, and a partner at that law firm who I spent a lot of time working with got to be part of a 250 candidate plus search process back in 2008 on the heels of the late, great 𝘗𝘭𝘢𝘺 passing away suddenly. He announced, I think it was like a Friday, that he had pancreatic cancer. And very sadly, by Monday, it was a matter of days, he had passed away. Navigating, watching them and learning about the organization as they navigated that and narrowed that 250 to 100 to 60 to 40 to 20 to 10 to 8 to 4, and then picking one finalist who ended up being my colleague, was fascinating. He, once he got that job, said, are you willing to take the plunge, and leave, the practice of law to come in-house in sports? My parents were like, what are you doing? Is that a real job? Do you have a real office? And look, I mean, I come from Michigan, right outside of Detroit. That's union country through and through. And so, on the one hand, it was being able to work in sports, but also that sport, but also, being able to advocate and be on the side of employees and labor, super appealing to me. And so I pounced on it. And I think, there is a part of that is, being fortunate enough to be thought of, to and be asked to join somebody, but also being nimble enough and flexible and saying, okay, what I was planning for my career, I'm going to crumple that up and throw it away because this sounds really cool. And remember, at the time, the owners had opted out of the CBA. We were less than 2 years away from a lockout, and that's what happened, of course. And I remember vividly telling my wife, like, look, we had lived in our, promised her we bought this townhouse. We were going to live there 3 to 5 years, and we'll get a new place that was bigger and had more space for our kids. And 7 years later, I had to tell her, hey, so I'm actually going to take this job, but I might not have a job in 2 years because we might get locked out, but we probably will. So I need you to, like, stick with me here, and we're going to punt this, house thing for another couple of years because we're not quite ready yet, right? And so in hindsight, it feels like a no-brainer, but I remember vividly there were a whole bunch of things, and there's still a bunch of lawyers running around DC saying, man, Ahmad, you should have really, like, stuck it out in law firm and government land. And there's no part of me that thinks they are right, but I see what they're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. What one piece of advice would you have for somebody who's looking into the sports business?
Yeah, that is a question I get pretty frequently. And I've kind of settled on a pretty uniform answer that, I got to be honest, few people seem to, like, take me up on. And so maybe it's not a good answer, or maybe it's just hard, because I think a lot of people do the whole calling and asking for coffee and emailing, and I get that, and I was that guy, right, for a long time. But when you do that, you're unintentionally putting the burden on the other person, when really you want them to take time out for you, right? And so the way to flip that and make them, because I do plenty of coffees. I'm doing one in a couple days, right? Like that. But there's a limit to that, right? And you can't scale that as any individual. And you're subject to their schedule and the whims. And so the advice is, how can you be of service without actually, like, be in the sports industry without, like, anybody can open up an account on X, right? And now there's all these, like, the top 25 sports X accounts to follow, or Instagram sports business Instagram accounts to follow. If you look at them, many of them, that was their start, right? And so what were they doing? They were aggregating news. They were opining on certain news. They had a specialty. There's a guy, Pro Football Talk, that does a bunch of stuff, right, around the NFL, that is now part of NBC. That guy was a lawyer. Like, he just 20 years ago started blogging. The joke is, like, in his mom's basement, right, about sports. And then here he is, 20. So he was of service. And I think if I'm thinking about somebody who's younger and looking to break in, and maybe not wanting to be as public as, like, creating an account on Instagram and doing that, okay, email Adam Silver and say, I want to co-author a law review article with you. Okay. And I'll do the grunt work. I'll do the research, but you're going to co-author it with me, because it will get published because it has Adam Silver's name on it. Okay. And so that, I don't know if Adam Silver would care about that, but my point is, Adam Silver is probably unlikely to either have the time or energy at this point in his career to say, I'm going to sit down and write a law review article, or some article. And I vividly remember reading his op-ed about sports betting in the New York Times 10 plus years ago. And that kicked off this whole chain. So, these things matter. Okay. And so being able to, how can you help somebody, for you guys, right? How can they help? If somebody's saying, I want to hear about how you got your start, and how do I get in, instead of saying, you buy me coffee? Can you hire me? Can I be a consultant paid X, Y, or Z? Hey, can I Can I help book guests? Can I help do research to get you ready to do the interviews? Like, how can somebody looking to break in be of service? Because if you do that, people like us, the three of us who are already in it in some way, shape, or form, are going to remember that. And then when something comes up, whether it's a friend of ours saying, "Do you know anybody who can," you're going to say, "Oh yeah, this guy or this woman helped me," and they didn't have to do that. And you're still building your network, but you're doing it in a way that instead of putting the burden on the people you're
Hmm.
contacting, you're actually incentivizing them to say, "Oh yeah, let me talk to you because you're going to help me with something."
Yeah, that's tremendous. And two things out of that. Number one, I think that's going to be a great sports biz break in. That's the segment that we do off of these. Hashtag sports biz break in. And secondly, Tim, I think we have a future if we stick this out. Is
Well,
that
I was going to say another thing somebody could do is start a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely,
the,
absolutely.
the barrier's so low.
Yeah.
All right, Ahmad, cannot thank you enough. You brought some fascinating perspective because we tend to look at the league side. We'll be the first to admit that we tend to have more people from the team league side to get the side that you've always been on, because oftentimes we don't think about that, particularly in a sport like tennis, that there's so many players grinding it out, trying to make a living. And with the PTPA, you're working to try to give them an opportunity to monetize what they're out doing as professionals. So thank you for bringing that perspective. We wish you nothing but luck through the U.S. Open and all the stuff that you have going on, and best of everything.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so we're back, and as David alluded to before, for the interview, we pre-recorded our interview with Ahmad Nassar last week. So thank you to him. He's going into an extremely busy part of his year, coming out of the Cincinnati Open, going into the U.S. Open. So we're really appreciative of Ahmad taking that time to speak to us. But we're back and we're looking forward. David, what are you looking forward to over the coming weeks?
Well, a quick shout out, I guess a couple shout outs that I want to make tied to our chat with Ahmad. And that's to Andy Slate, who really helped arrange this interview, as well as Amanda Smith, who is the office manager and exec assistant there at Winners Alliance. So I wanted to thank them both, because that was a really interesting interview, I think, for us. As we talked about with Ahmad, we take the league perspective a lot. Not that we take the league perspective, but we have a lot of guests on from the league team side and haven't on the labor side. And given the importance of that side of the business, as we have talked about just on this show alone, I thought it was great to get that perspective. So big thanks to everyone there for making that happen. So what am I looking for? I am heading to Chicago this week, and I'm going to pop in and try to see a little AUSL All-Star Cup action in Rosemont. Maybe say hi to another past guest, Vanessa Tavares. This is, I think, a record for referencing past guests episode. It has to be. We're definitely up there. We do it a lot.
Yeah,
we like dropping the great names of guests we have.
Usually we try to do it. Now it's we're getting so good at it, it's coming naturally.
It's feeling natural. It's organic. So I am looking forward to that. MLB storylines have just been coming fast and furious, it seems, this year. And they are apparently very close to a new media rights deal, announcing it. But there is also a lot of expectation for division league realignment, which I think is going to be pretty fascinating to see if they pull the trigger and make that happen. And I also want to say that the connection that we discussed with Liz last week about MLB and Little League, I think seeing that play out in the broadcasts from on ESPN from Williamsport with the game between the Mets and the Mariners, I think was just so fantastic, because that truly is a really cool partnership, how they built that. And I think each year it gets a little better. But just continued big news coming out of MLB, and this has nothing to do with the CBA negotiations they're going to be having. Lots to be looking for on the side of MLB, both from a television distribution news, rights deals announcements, as well as potential realignment.
So I want to give a quick shout out, not to ride on your coattails, but Debbie Antonelli, a past guest.
This is unbelievable.
I recently got a thank you note for my donation to her 24 Hours Nothing But Net philanthropy initiative. For those of you who don't remember our conversation with Debbie, every year Debbie stands in her driveway and shoots 3 free throws for 24 straight hours. So she has to make 100 free throws per hour for 24 hours. So 2,400 free throws, if my math is correct. But she raised over $400,000 this year, bringing her, or 700,000, excuse me, bringing her total over the last 7 years to over $1.7 million for Special Olympics. So kudos to Debbie and all the great work she does for Special Olympics. As far as what I'm looking forward to, so there's a couple of things. One is the U.S. Open tennis. I know you're a big tennis fan, much bigger tennis fan than I am, but that is such a cool event. And what I love about the U.S. Open, it's almost the tale of two tournaments, right? The first week of the tournament tends to happen in the heat of the summer, and then by the semifinals and the finals, people are bundled up and they're selling hot chocolate like nobody's business. Concession stand. So I'm really looking forward to that. But one story I'm keeping an eye on, as we mentioned, NFL made an investment in ESPN. ESPN gets the intellectual property to the NFL Red Zone. There has been talk that ESPN will then try to extend that brand to college football, basketball, other sports, and so forth. What I'm hearing is that, as of right now, at least Fox is not willing to share highlights from its Big Ten and Big 12 games. But I don't necessarily think that's the last word on this. I think, like anything else, I think if there's a deal to be struck, it makes sense for those conferences and for Fox to have those highlights shared on Collegiate Red Zone, whatever ESPN decides to call it. But I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that. If I was a betting man, I'd say eventually ESPN will get access to Big Ten and Big 12 highlights.
Yeah, they'll figure out the right formula to make that happen. I have to say, and by the way, Debbie Antonelli's charity is such a great one. I do have to say, and I'm for someone that I know is way better at math than me, but to have to say, if my math is correct on an equation that was 24 hours, 100 per hour, to say if my math is correct is, come on, man.
That's called self-deprecating humor.
I know. I love it. But that would have been one that I might have had to figure out, but anyway.
I wrote it down longhand before I said it. I didn't want to embarrass myself. All right. So I think that's it, partner. So with that, we will thank you, our listeners. Please find us wherever you find your podcast. Like us, follow us, subscribe, comment, share. We have a growing audience, and we're really excited about that. So until next week, he's DP, I'm McGhee, and we'll talk soon.